Her laugh didn't just echo, it shimmered. I remember standing in that swarm of bodies at the downtown street food festival, holding a cardboard tray of dumplings that cost way too much, when I heard it. That laugh, like something soft dropped onto concrete, unexpected, real. I turned, saw her Celeste Maris, standing in front of a bao bun stand, mid-conversation with the vendor, teasing him over something. Her dark curls were pinned loosely, bouncing every time she moved, and her eyes. Her eyes were those kinds that stayed on your mind after the moment passed. I don't know why I walked over. I wasn't the type to interrupt or intrude, but something about her made the air feel different. So I did. I smiled, said something stupid. Are those dumplings worth the line or just good looking from a distance? She looked at me like I'd been there all along. Depends. Are you one of those people who put sriracha on everything? That was the first flicker of something that felt like home. We sat on a concrete step while the city buzzed around us, shared dumplings, and traded slivers of our lives like trading cards. I told her I was a freelance architectural designer, half artist, half stressed-out spreadsheet junkie. She told me she was a nurse, third shift mostly, had dreams of opening a wellness clinic for underserved neighborhoods. She wasn't trying to impress me. That was the part that got me. She was grounded. She had opinions. She knew what she wanted. And somehow, even in a city full of stories being written every second, ours began right there, greasy fingers and all. The months that followed were warm in ways that didn't come from weather. We built a rhythm. Midnight calls. Grocery runs that turned into dance breaks in aisle 6. The first time she met my friends, they said, "She gets you," and for once, I believe someone did. She brought color to corners of my life I didn't even know were gray. Introduced me to her family early. Verena, her mother, with sharp eyes and sharper words. Clark, quiet and polite. Sloan, younger and cocky, who spoke in hashtags and sarcasm. But they welcomed me, or pretended to. I remember Verena gripping both my hands after dinner, her wedding ring glinting like a badge of authority, saying, "It's good to see a man who knows what commitment looks like." I should have known then that she wasn't complimenting me. She was testing me. The proposal was my idea, but she made it feel like a collaboration. I took her to the rooftop of the old gallery building where I used to sketch cityscapes before deadlines buried my creativity. The skyline looked exactly how we'd talked about, twinkling, expansive, like it was applauding its own brilliance. I had the ring in my pocket, knees aching from crouching too long in my office all day, palms sweating like a rookie. When I asked her to marry me, she didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just said, "Took you long enough," and kissed me like it was the first time. That night, we celebrated with her family. Champagne. Balloons. Verena gave a toast like she'd been waiting for the mic. "To Russell," she said, raising her glass with that glossy smile of hers, who sees what we've always seen in our daughter, strength, grace, and a future. Sloan clapped like he was hyping up a concert. Clark nodded his approval and gave me a stiff hug. It was overwhelming, but not in a bad way. I felt like I'd been accepted into something real, something that would expand my life instead of shrinking it. Back then, I didn't understand that not all families expand your world. Some just absorb you into theirs. The wedding was stunning. Verena had opinions, of course. No pastel flowers. They photographed poorly. Absolutely no buffet stations. We're not hosting a block party. But I chalked it up to enthusiasm. Celeste seemed to float above it all, calm and beautiful, her hands always finding mine when I felt adrift. Our vows were simple. She said, "You calm the storm I didn't know I had." I said, "You see the parts of me I never knew how to name." And we meant every word. For a while, married life was sweet. Comfortable, even. Celeste kept nursing. I worked from home, contracts came in, and I kept the lights on with a balance of artistry and survival mode. Our condo, paid off and perched perfectly above Lake Shore Drive, became our sanctuary. Sunday mornings with French press coffee and throw blankets. Lazy Saturdays with takeout and reruns. We even started planning a baby name list, just for fun, we told ourselves. But every time I said, "Zadie," she'd smile a little longer than she meant to, like she could see her already. But what I didn't see then, what I only recognize now in brutal hindsight, is how closely Celeste's smile mirrored her mother's. How often her suggestions mirrored Sloane's needs. How many times I said yes, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to disrupt what looked like harmony. That's the dangerous thing about surface peace. It tricks you into ignoring the storm building beneath it. I held on to the version of us that met over dumplings. The version that talked late into the night about purpose and kindness and building something better. I didn't realize how much of that version I was carrying alone. Celeste still touched my hand the same way, still laughed at my dumb jokes, still wore the pendant I got her on our first anniversary. But slowly, subtly, I became a background character in the narrative her family was scripting. Helpful, agreeable, silent. Still, I didn't pull back. I leaned in, loved harder, offered more, because I believed that was the currency of real marriage, sacrifice and support. And maybe it is, when both people are spending equally. But when one side just keeps collecting, eventually the balance breaks. And looking back now, it all started with a laugh at a dumpling stand. A laugh that sounded like freedom. A laugh I mistook for forever. I used to think marriage was about building something together, brick by brick, choice by choice. But what I learned instead, somewhere between the wedding cake and the first full year, was that marrying Celeste also meant marrying her family's gravitational pull. And nothing, not even love, escapes a force that strong. The first time Verena let herself into our condo, I thought it was a fluke. I came home from a site visit and found her standing in our living room, staring out the window like she'd owned the view for years. "You really don't have sheer panels," she said, not even turning to greet me. "Natural light this strong needs diffusers, otherwise it just washes out the room. Didn't they teach you that in design school?" I tried to laugh, tried to brush it off. "I kind of like the wash," I said, trying to disarm her with charm. "It feels honest." She finally turned, those cool blue eyes narrowing. "And it feels cold." Celeste laughed when I told her later. "That's just Mom. She's dramatic." But the next time Verena came over, she brought fabric swatches. The time after that, a measuring tape. A week later, we had curtains I didn't choose, and a living room arrangement that somehow made my favorite reading chair disappear into a storage unit. When I brought it up, Celeste smiled the way people do when they don't want to fight. "It's just furniture, babe." She's trying to help. It wasn't just furniture. It was the way our lives started twisting to fit a mold I hadn't agreed to. Verena had a key, just in case, she said, and she used it like a punch card. She'd come by to check on things, which usually meant digging through our kitchen or standing too long in the hallway like she was mentally rearranging everything. The condo I'd worked years to afford, the one I paid off penny by penny from the chaos of freelance life, no longer felt like mine. It was like I was leasing it from them. And Sloan, God, Sloan. He was the kind of person who never landed on his feet because he expected the ground to rise for him. In his 20s with no consistent job, no consistent rent payments, but plenty of stories. Get-rich-quick schemes. NFTs, crypto startups. Once, he tried to sell me on an app that tracked how many hours you spent being vibe drained by people in your life. He called it social battery. "You be the face of the campaign, bro," he said. "You look like the guy who knows when to walk away." He grinned like it was a compliment. Celeste rolled her eyes. "But Verena?" She lit up. "He's just creative," she said, patting his knee like he was 5. "He just needs structure." Structure meant money. Ours. Every family dinner started the same. Wine, updates, laughter, but always ended with some new Sloan emergency. A roommate skipped rent. A car borrowed got totaled. A credit card was frozen unfairly. There was always a story, always a moment where Verena would sigh dramatically and look around the table like casting a play, and always, her eyes would land on me. "You're so level-headed, Russell," she'd say, as if that was a compliment and not a test. "He needs someone like you to guide him." And Celeste, bless her, would squeeze my hand and say, "We'll figure it out." We. That word became dangerous, because it never meant she and I. It meant me, footing the bill, solving the problem, carrying the weight. I paid Sloan's car insurance for 3 months, lent him a security deposit. Once, I even co-signed for a used Ford because Verena insisted he'd gotten a real job this time. That job lasted 2 weeks. The car? Gone in 3. I didn't say no enough. That's the part one owned. I wanted to be seen as dependable, to prove I wasn't just Celeste's partner, but someone the whole family could count on. I mistook exploitation for inclusion, and I kept thinking that if I gave enough, if I stretched just a little further, they'd stop pulling. But love doesn't live in sacrifices unacknowledged. It dies there. One night, after Sloan showed up at our door asking if he could crash for a few days because his lease fell through, I told Celeste no. Not, let me think about it. Not, under one condition. Just no. He needs to learn to handle his life, I said. He needs consequences, not another couch. She looked at me like I'd just spit on her childhood. He's my brother, she said. I can't just abandon him. I'm not asking you to abandon him, I said, quieter now. I'm asking you not to sacrifice us for him. She didn't say anything, just walked into the kitchen and started doing dishes we didn't eat from. I watched her shoulders stiffen, the space between us stretching like a bridge mid-collapse. That's when I realized I hadn't married a partner. I'd married a loyalist. Her allegiance to her family wasn't something she questioned. It was a default setting. To love her meant to accept them, no edits, no boundaries. And yet, I still loved her. I still believed we could carve something real out of the pressure. I thought if I was patient enough, generous enough, she'd see the difference between a partner and a utility. I was wrong. But back then, I still held on. The thing about pressure is, it doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just compacts you slowly, until you can't remember what shape you were before it began. And I was changing. Quietly. Carefully. But I was changing. Because somewhere in all that noise, I started hearing myself again. Faint, stubborn, refusing to vanish. And I knew, eventually, I'd have to decide whose voice I was going to follow. Mine or theirs. I held her in one arm, wrapped in the scratchy hospital-issued blanket, a little wrinkled fighter with a squashed nose and a heartbeat that thumped through her chest like she was trying to announce herself to the world. Zadie. Our Zadie. Born in the middle of a February snowstorm that shut down half the city, the kind of storm that usually meant delays, inconvenience, gridlock. But she didn't delay. She arrived exactly when she was ready, and she didn't cry until the nurse tried to measure her. That, apparently, she had a problem with. I remember looking at her and thinking, this changes everything. And for a brief moment, I believed it. I believed that this child, our child, could be the great equalizer. The little miracle that brought clarity, unity, and realignment to the chaos that was Celeste's family orbit. I thought becoming parents would elevate us from the Maris group chat, from Verina's uninvited visits, from Sloane's habitual meltdowns. Surely a new baby, a fragile life dependent on calm and care, would be the boundary that couldn't be crossed. But boundaries meant nothing to the Maris family, not even when drawn in crayon. Zadie was barely 5 days old when Verina walked into our home and started critiquing the nursery like it was a design exhibit. Gray walls? Really? She said, scanning the room like she was the final judge of a competition I never entered. It's scientifically proven that color impacts neurological development. This is depressing. She moved toward the crib, touching it without asking, examining the fabric like it was counterfeit. And this isn't organic cotton, is it? I wanted to scream. But instead, I stood in the doorway, holding a bottle I had just warmed, watching her dismantle our choices with a condescending tilt of her head. Celeste didn't say anything. She just sat on the edge of the glider, rocking Zadie gently, as if her mother wasn't making our home feel like a mistake. Mom just wants the best, she whispered when I finally confronted her later. She's intense, but she means well. Means well. That became the phrase she pulled out every time Verina bulldozed a decision. And when it wasn't Verina, it was Sloane. Now that we had Zadie, every crisis of his became urgent, and somehow Zadie's existence was supposed to justify our involvement. One night, we were in the middle of changing her diaper when Celeste's phone rang. Sloane had gotten into a bar fight. I need bail, he muttered, voice shaking. Celeste didn't hesitate. She looked at me like I already knew what had to be done. I stared at her, at the baby on the table, at the clock on the wall blinking 2:14 a.m. We have a newborn, I said. And we have a mortgage. He's family, she said. And I wanted to scream, so is she. And point at our daughter, who was squirming against the Velcro of her onesie, unaware that she was being raised in a battleground of misplaced loyalty. I thought fatherhood would anchor us. But instead, it became a performance. Verina wanted pictures for her social media, carefully staged. She wanted to be called Nana, despite never once babysitting or changing a diaper. She started showing up with books about gentle parenting, as if we'd asked for guidance. She criticized the formula brand I chose, the stroller, the lullabies I played from my phone. At one point, she told Celeste, within earshot of me, he's doing his best, I suppose. Not everyone has maternal instincts. Celeste said nothing. I stopped expecting her to. And yet, through all of it, I was there. I woke up at every feeding. I bathed Zadie gently in the plastic baby tub until she was warm and sleepy and soft. I made little routines, tapping her nose twice after a bottle, humming the same off-key tune before each nap. When I held her, she'd tuck her face into my neck like she knew I was her safe place. Her grip was small but determined. She didn't care about the politics or power plays. She just wanted to be held. Federal protected. So I did all three. And still, I kept thinking. Maybe Celeste would catch up. Maybe when she saw the way Zadie looked at me, really looked at me, she'd understand that we were building something different here, something that needed its own oxygen to breathe. I kept waiting for that moment, for her to say enough, to Verena, to Sloane, to everyone who treated our life like an annex of theirs. But instead, she joined them. It started subtly. Mom says we're overfeeding her. Mom read something about this sleep schedule app. Mom thinks we should be more present, less on our phones. Always, Mom says. Never what she believed, what she wanted, what she noticed. Even when I pointed it out, she'd get defensive. Why are you so against advice? She'd say. Why is it always a battle with you? Because I was already at war. Alone. One afternoon, while I was at the park with Zadie, a stranger complimented me. You don't see dads like you often, she said, smiling at the way I held the bottle. She trusts you. You can tell. I said thank you. But when I walked home, something in me cracked open. I was tired of being unusual for loving my daughter with my whole heart. Tired of fighting for space in a family that didn't know how to share it. Tired of trying to be agreeable in a house that never asked what I actually agreed with. Zadie deserved more than performative love. She deserved parents who didn't constantly look outside their home for validation. She deserved stability, not drama. Truth. Not curated narratives. I made up my mind that day. I wouldn't let her become a trophy in the mayor's family cabinet. Not while I had breath in my lungs. And if that meant protecting her from her own mother's blind spots, so be it. Because fatherhood wasn't a title. It was a vow, one I intended to keep, even if no one else did. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those deceptive days where the weather's crisp, the light pours in just right, and you think, for a fleeting second, that everything's manageable. Zadie had just gone down for a nap, her little limbs curled beneath the knitted blanket Celeste's cousin sent from Denver. I was halfway through adjusting a CAD rendering for a client when I heard Celeste's voice. Quiet. Trembling. Russell, can we talk? My first thought wasn't panic. It was exhaustion. Her tone had grown heavier lately, the way someone sounds when they know they're about to ask too much. Again. I walked into the living room and saw her sitting at the edge of the couch, her knees tucked, hands knotted. She looked up at me, eyes glassy, and behind her, almost blending into the neutral wall like a wraith, stood Verena. Arms folded. Expression blank. Lips drawn so tight they were almost invisible. My stomach sank. Celeste motioned for me to sit. I didn't. I stood near the arm of the chair I used to call mine. Until Verena declared it clashed with the energy of the room and moved it 2 feet to the left. Small acts, but constant. I waited. It's Sloane, Celeste started. Of course it was. She paused, trying to form the shape of something shameful in her mouth. He got in trouble again. Bigger trouble. Verena stepped forward then, her voice a clinical scalpel. He's made some regrettable choices. There's a debt. I said nothing. Just stared. Waited for the trap to spring. Celeste glanced at me like she was trying to read a manual in a language she didn't quite understand. Russell, it's $3 million. That number didn't register at first. I thought I misheard. 3 million? As in, not 3,000? Not some investment disaster or identity theft error that could be undone with a few furious calls. How? I asked finally, my voice quieter than I meant. How does someone lose $3 million? Private games, Verena said flatly. Vegas. Sloane had backing from some, less than reputable sources. He thought he could double it. It spiraled. Did he win anything? I asked, bitter even as the words left my mouth. He won a broken nose in 2 weeks to pay up, Verena said, completely devoid of irony. He's lucky they gave him that. And you're telling me this. Why? Celeste inhaled sharply. Because we need help. Sloane, he's family. Russ. And he's in danger. She reached for me then. I stepped back. What kind of help are you asking for? I said, though I already knew. Verena pulled a manila folder from her bag. Set it gently on the coffee table like it was a guest. Sell the condo. It's already appreciated in value. You're sitting on more than what's needed. Just like that. Not a suggestion. A command. I stared at the folder, then back at her. then at Celeste, whose hands now trembled in her lap. You want me to sell our home, I said slowly, to cover your brother's gambling debt? Celeste nodded, barely. It's temporary. Just enough to get the collectors off his back. We can rent somewhere else for a while. Rebuild. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out. Sharp, sudden, hollow. You want me to give up the only thing I fully own. The place where our daughter sleeps. Because your brother, who hasn't held a steady job in his life, decided to act like he was born in a Martin Scorsese movie. Celeste flinched. Verena didn't. You don't really have a choice, Verena said smoothly, with a smile that made my skin crawl. If they come after Sloane, they come after all of us. And if you love your daughter, you'll do what's necessary to keep her safe. There it was. The implication. Not even subtle. Threat wrapped in motherly concern. Something inside me shifted then. Not snapped, but crystallized. I looked at Celeste, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at the woman who had dominated every inch of our marriage like it was a real estate acquisition. I looked at that folder like it was the final act in a long play I never auditioned for. I need to think, I said. There's nothing to think about, Verena replied, stepping closer. I need to think, I repeated louder now. I'm not signing anything. Not today. Celeste stood, finally, conflicted, desperate, something human breaking through. Russell, please. He's my brother. And this is my home, I said. You want to save your brother? Sell your car. Ask your father. Refinance your mother's summer house. But don't come into my living room and pretend like my daughter's roof should be your currency. I walked past them. Into the hallway. Into the room where Zadie slept, unaware. I closed the door gently behind me and stood there, hand on the crib rail, staring at her tiny chest rise and fall. I'd never felt such clarity in my life. Because love isn't asking someone to destroy themselves for your comfort. Love isn't threatening stability in the name of shared blood. Love, real love, doesn't smell like desperation and control. When I finally emerged, the living room was empty. The folder was still on the table. But something far heavier had been dropped between us. And I wasn't planning to carry it. Not anymore. The folder sat on the table like it had grown roots overnight. I didn't touch it. I didn't even open it. Just stared at it from across the room like it might vanish if I stared hard enough. Like maybe the whole ridiculous suggestion would undo itself. But nothing vanished. Not the folder, not the request, and certainly not the quiet unraveling of everything I thought marriage was supposed to be. They'd left the night before without argument. That was the part that unsettled me. Verena always had a retort, always had a final say. But when I'd told them no, or at least told them I needed to think, she didn't protest. She smiled. A smile that said, "We'll wait. You'll fold. You always do." Celeste didn't come to bed that night. I heard her in the guest room, pacing for a while, then silence. Zadie slept soundly. I checked her twice, then a third time just to feel the peace of her breath, the softness of her hair against my palm. I whispered that I'd protect her, but it felt like a whisper to myself too. I needed to believe it. I needed something in this house to believe. The next morning, Celeste was already in the kitchen when I got up. She had that look again, serene, polished, every emotion ironed flat under her practiced expression. She poured coffee like it was a scene from a sitcom. No anger, no tension, just the scent of dark roast filling the space between us. I didn't sleep, she said. Not as an apology. Just a fact. I nodded. Neither did I. She sat down across from me, not even looking at the folder, which still sat untouched. It's not just about Sloane, Russell. You know that. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because it sure sounded like it was. Her fingers wrapped around the mug, and her voice dropped. My mom's right. These people, they don't just disappear. They don't let things go. If Sloane doesn't pay them, they will come for him. And when they find out he has a sister with a stable life, a child, a husband with assets. You mean a husband with a paid-off home? I interrupted. That's what you meant. Just say it. She flinched. It was small, but I saw it. The veil slipped, just for a second. It's not like that, she murmured. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. Let her sit in it. Finally, I asked, who drew up the documents? She didn't answer. Celeste, who? Was it Verena's lawyer? Yes, she said after a pause. But he's fast. Efficient. I almost laughed. Efficient. You had transfer documents prepared before I agreed to anything. I thought you would say yes, she said softly. That hurt more than I expected. Because that's who you think I am? Just agreeable? A wallet with a heartbeat. No, she said quickly. Because you love us. Because you always show up. That part stung in a different way. Because it was true. I did show up. For every diaper change. Every sleepless night. Every ridiculous dinner with Verena where I had to smile while Sloane begged for another favor. I showed up for the version of us I thought we were building. And I kept showing up, long after the blueprint had changed. But now, I couldn't ignore what they were really asking. They weren't just asking for a home. They were asking for control. For obedience disguised as loyalty. For me to sacrifice everything I'd worked for, not for family, but for their convenience. I stood up and left the room without another word. I went to the study and opened the drawer I'd locked 3 months earlier. Inside was a leather folder of my own, thicker than the one on the coffee table, more precise. I'd started working with Amina Delane after Verena rearranged our finances one too many times without asking. A quiet referral from a friend who had gone through something similar, different players, same playbook. Amina didn't ask many questions, just listened. And then she moved. With her help, I'd already begun locking things down. Separate accounts, trusts, legal walls that couldn't be breached with guilt or groupthink. And the condo? I hadn't lied when I told them I needed to think. What I hadn't told them was that the condo wasn't in my name anymore. Not really. 3 weeks ago, I moved it into a trust under Zadie's name. Not for tax reasons. Not for games. For protection. A bulletproof clause that stated it could not be sold, transferred, or leveraged for any purpose until she turned 21, and only if her legal guardians unanimously consented. One of those guardians was me. The other? Not Celeste. I had secured the right to act solely in Zadie's interest if any conflict of intent emerged between her parents. I hadn't wanted to use it. I wanted to believe we'd never get here. But here we were. I walked back into the kitchen and set my folder beside theirs. What's this? Celeste asked. Insurance, I said. Peace of mind. For Zadie. She opened it, slowly at first, then faster as the reality settled in. Her mouth moved a little, trying to form words. You did this behind my back? I did it to protect her, I said. From you. From your mother. From Sloane. From anyone who thinks this home is a checkbook instead of a foundation. Her hands trembled. You want to save your brother? I said. Find another way. This place is hers now. You don't get to give it away. Verena showed up half an hour later. Celeste must have called her. I opened the door, let her in, watched as she strutted to the table like a general arriving to clean up after a soldier failed a mission. She saw the folder. Read enough to understand. You clever little coward, she said. No, not a coward, I replied. Just a man who finally stopped playing along. She narrowed her eyes. You think this protects you? No, I said, glancing at the baby monitor. It protects her. Then I handed her a sealed copy of the trust documents and walked away. I didn't watch her face. I didn't need to. I already knew what it looked like when control slipped through her fingers. And this time, I wasn't the one holding the pen. Zadie was. They thought I was bluffing. That's what still amazes me when I look back on it now. The way they sat across from me, Verena in her pressed blazer, Celeste with her wounded stare. As if this was just another one of my little resistance phases. Like I'd fold, eventually. I always had. That's what made me useful to them. Reliable. Predictable. The man who wouldn't rock the boat, even as they loaded it with their mess. But what they never knew was that 3 months earlier, while they were busy planning my compliance, I was already planning my exit. It began as instinct. A whisper that something was off. Not just with the way they dismissed my input, or how Sloane's name seemed to come up in every financial decision, but in how easily my wife started looking past me when her mother was in the room. It was in the way my coffee started coming pre-sweetened, because Mom says you'll adjust. Or how I found out about Sloane crashing a rented Tesla only because I overheard a phone call they never intended for me to hear. I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. I watched. Took notes. Measured my next steps like I would an unstable beam on a site plan. Quietly. Thoroughly. And then I met Amina Delane. She didn't advertise herself as a fighter, but that's exactly what she was. Her office was small, tucked behind a florist on Belmont Avenue, and her voice never rose above calm. She read through the financial documents I brought in, mortgage deeds, shared bank statements, my pay stubs, Celeste's, the condo title. And by the time she looked up at me, she already had a blueprint in her mind. You've been treated like an ATM, she said, simple and surgical. But you still have leverage. Your asset is clean. No debt. Paid in full. And if you move it strategically, you can make it legally untouchable. I asked her what it would take. She said, trust. Not in her. In Zadie. A few weeks later, after meticulous work, the condo was moved into a secure trust under Zadie Wynn's name. A minor's trust, with restrictions so tight not even Celeste could touch it without jumping through a legal obstacle course. Amina helped me draft a clause, my clause, that granted me sole veto power until Zadie turned 21. Any sale, lease, refinance, or modification required my approval. If anyone tried to manipulate me into giving it up, automatic injunction. I didn't do it out of vengeance. I did it because I knew what was coming. I knew Verena. I knew her tone. The way her demands came gift-wrapped in etiquette. I knew Celeste's silences were never blank, they were deliberate. And I knew Sloan, whose recklessness was so baked into his DNA that the only thing you could count on was that he would find a new way to implode. When they came to me with the $3 million request, they thought I was just a husband, just a father, just a man who cared too much to say no. They didn't know I had already drawn the line they'd never see coming. When I handed them the trust papers, they didn't understand at first. Celeste looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You can't just do this, she whispered. You didn't even tell me. That was the point, I said. You would have tried to stop me. I'm your wife, Russell. Exactly. And you still chose your brother's chaos over our daughter's safety. I had to be a father first. Verena didn't speak at all that day. Just looked at me the way you'd look at a stubborn branch refusing to snap in a windstorm. She wasn't used to resistance that held its ground. She was used to posturing, not plans. But the moment I saw her reading Clause 7b, the one about sole guardianship discretion, her lips parted slightly. Just enough. She knew. They'd underestimated me. The following days were quiet. That was the strangest part. No calls. No surprise visits. Just the hum of a house that had been theirs in every way but name. I half expected a tantrum, a plea, a final act of persuasion. But instead, there was nothing. Until Celeste called. Just once. I didn't answer, but the voicemail came through. Her voice was different. Soft. Bruised. Russell, I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't think it would get this far. I thought you'd understand. I thought love meant standing with me, no matter what. I replayed it 3 times. Love means standing with someone, yes, but not standing still while they drag you under. I spent those days with Zadie like she was the only real thing left in my world. We went to the park, ate apples on the back porch while she babbled in half-formed sentences. I sketched while she finger-painted. She was joy untouched. I realized then that everything I'd done wasn't just about protecting her from harm. It was about preserving that joy, the innocence, the freedom to be raised without the weight of other people's failures pressing down on her back. On the 4th day, a courier came. Thick envelope. Legal insignia. A cease and desist from Verena's lawyer. I smiled before I even opened it, because they wouldn't be sending threats if they weren't already losing. I sent it straight to Amina. By sundown, a formal injunction had been filed. Verena would never be able to coerce me again. The trust was bulletproof. My role as guardian was upheld, and now the court was involved. There would be a record of every attempt they made to undermine it. Celeste called again. This time, I answered. We don't have to do this like enemies, she said immediately. I'm not your enemy, I said. But I'm not your resource either. Not anymore. She was silent. You picked your brother, I added, but I picked Zadie. That's the difference. She didn't fight me. She didn't cry. She just hung up. And I stood there in the quiet, in the home they could never take, knowing that I had done what so few people get to do. I'd build a line they couldn't cross. And now that it held, so did I. I wish I could say I felt powerful when the process started, when Celeste got served, when Verena's world finally tilted. But I didn't. I felt hollow, like I'd pulled the trigger on something that had been quietly dying for years. Because even when someone pushes you to the edge, even when the betrayal is layered and calculated, part of you still mourns what should have been. The dreams, the effort, the dumb little traditions you thought meant something. And I had believed in us, God, I had. But that belief had teeth marks in it now. So when the legal documents were handed to Celeste in the middle of her shift at the clinic, it wasn't revenge that coursed through me. It was grief, laced with steel. Amina had timed it for precision. Emergency protection orders. Custody rights enforced. An injunction that sealed Zadie's trust and froze any attempts to tamper with its structure. We also filed a petition for legal separation, citing emotional coercion and financial endangerment. There was no more guessing. I wasn't waiting to be trampled again. I'd stepped out of the path. Celeste called 47 times that night. I watched the screen light up with every missed call, the notifications piling like warnings. She didn't leave voicemails at first, just silence. Then they came, first soft, then unhinged. A blend of pleading and fire, sweetened promises laced with venom. I was scared. Russell, we can fix this. You're ruining everything. How dare you weaponize our daughter? You're just like my father. Each message chipped away at any last remnant of hope I had. Because even when someone is breaking, there's a way to do it with grace. But this was war. The next morning, Verena showed up at my door. She didn't knock like a visitor. She pounded like she owned the place. I opened it slowly, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted her to stand in that moment, to see that nothing in me was budging anymore. "You smug bastard," she said, pushing her sunglasses up onto her head, her face red from rage or embarrassment. I couldn't tell. "How dare you drag this family through court like some soap opera?" I didn't respond. I simply reached into the side table drawer and handed her an envelope. She stared at it like it might bite her. "What's this?" "A courtesy," I said. "The official trust documents. In case your lawyer didn't explain it to you clearly enough the first time." She opened it right there in the doorway, flipping through pages with fingers that looked too graceful for what they'd wrought. Her eyes stopped at Clause 7b again. I knew exactly which line froze her. The property held in trust cannot be leveraged, sold, or surrendered under duress or coercion, and may only be altered under the sole discretion of guardian A. Russell Wynn, until the child reaches 21 years of age. She clenched her jaw, then laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the laugh of someone realizing too late that the board had shifted and she wasn't the queen anymore. "You really think this will hold?" she asked. "I don't think," I said calmly. "I know. And so does the court. Celeste will fight this." "She already lost," I said. "You just haven't accepted it." I shut the door. I didn't slam it. Just closed it like I was sealing off a room that no longer needed air. On the other side, Verena didn't scream, didn't bang again. She was gone by the time I checked the peephole. And I knew then, really knew, that the grip they had was gone. For good. The days that followed were surreal. Papers filed. Statements signed. And through it all, Zadie remained the steady heartbeat of my life. I kept the routine. Bath time at 7, books by 7:30, her cheek pressed against my chest until she drifted off with a sigh. She didn't know a world was burning down around her. And that was the point. That was the goal. Then came the hearing. Celeste showed up looking like the woman I married. Poised, sympathetic, every strand of hair sculpted to suggest innocence. Her lawyer tried to argue it all away. Overcorrection, emotional stress, temporary lapse in judgment. But the evidence was damning. Screenshots, voicemails, the ridiculous folder of property transfer documents Verena had printed with $signs where dignity should have been. My lawyer presented it all methodically, without malice. And when the judge looked up, he said something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Wynn, financial entanglement caused by extended family does not justify compromising a child's home or security. Your husband took appropriate and necessary steps to protect his daughter from destabilization. If anything, the court commends his foresight." Commends. I didn't smile. I just exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Verena didn't show her face in court. Clark did, but he said nothing. Sat in the back row, watching it all fall like dominoes, and still managed to look vaguely disappointed in me. Sloan, from what I heard, had skipped town altogether. Nevada, maybe. Working off debt in a construction gig that paid cash and never asked questions. His story didn't matter anymore. His name no longer had the weight to drag mine down with it. Celeste, in the end, moved back in with her parents. A decision that told me more than anything else ever could. She didn't ask to see Zadie right away. She didn't send notes or gifts. Just vanished into that quiet corner of entitlement and shame, where pride nurses itself back into delusion. And Zadie and I? We stayed. In the condo no one could touch. In the home I built, not with bricks, but with boundaries. People called me cold. Some mutual friends, those who never bothered to ask for details, pulled away. Russell lost it. One of them whispered at a dinner I wasn't invited to. He used his own kid to get revenge. Let them talk. Let them write their version. I knew the truth. Zadie smiled when she woke up every morning, laughed when I danced with her in the kitchen, pointed to the stars through her bedroom window, and made me name each one like it had a story. She was whole. She was safe. And I had done that. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with a refusal to break. And sometimes, that's the loudest justice there is. The first morning after the ruling, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the light slide across the hardwood floor like nothing had changed. The world was still turning. Cars still passed outside. Birds still perched on the wires. But something inside me had shifted. Not dramatically. Not like an explosion. More like the quiet weight of a door finally clicking shut behind you. The kind of silence that follows resolution, not defeat. Zadie padded into the kitchen on her tiny feet, dragging her stuffed giraffe by the leg. "Milk, please," she said, half yawn, half command. She climbed onto the stool at the counter like she'd been doing it for years instead of months. And I just watched her for a moment. This little person who didn't know how close her world had come to being bartered away. I poured her milk. She took it with a sleepy thank you, her curls sticking out in wild directions, and I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd felt in weeks. Not polite, not for show, just real. Because the chaos had stopped. The daily erosion of peace, the looming threat of some new emergency, the feeling that any moment could spiral into crisis. I'd shut the door on all of it. And it stayed shut. The divorce moved quickly after that. Celeste tried to fight it in the beginning, of course. Her attorney filed petitions, delayed hearings, asked for mediation. But the evidence wasn't just in documents or legal filings. It was in her silences, her choices, the cumulative weight of her indifference. She wanted custody parity, but the courts saw through it. Her presence in Zadie's life had become conditional, sporadic. Verina's handprints were on every decision, and the court didn't like invisible puppeteers. During one hearing, Celeste sat across from me and said, "I didn't know I was losing you until you were gone." I didn't respond. Because the truth was, she hadn't lost me. She'd given me away, little by little, each time she looked the other way. Each time she chose comfort over confrontation. Sloan over us. Verina's approval over my respect. The judge granted me primary custody, citing consistency and stability. Celeste was allowed supervised visits, with the possibility of unsupervised time if she showed long-term improvement. She didn't cry. She just looked at me like she wanted to rewind everything, like regret had arrived too late to matter. Verina didn't show her face again. Not in court. Not in letters. Not in person. After the injunctions and the legal boundaries were made permanent, she retreated like a general who realized the war was no longer hers to win. She stopped calling. No more texts, no more pop-ins. Even her social media, once filled with curated posts of family dinners and faux inspirational captions, went quiet. It was as if she'd deleted the evidence of my existence altogether. Clark, on the other hand, surprised me. A few days after the final ruling, he left a note on my doorstep. No envelope, no return address, just a single sheet of paper in his familiar, squared handwriting. "I always knew they asked too much of you. I didn't stop it. I'm sorry. Take care of that little girl. She's the only one who really matters now." That was all. And somehow, it meant more than all the performative gestures they tried to force down my throat over the years. Sloan? Last I heard, he was working under an alias out in Reno. Construction. Cash only. The kind of job where nobody asks too many questions. A friend of a friend said he looked 10 years older than he was, like life had finally sobered him up the hard way. I didn't care enough to verify it. He wasn't a villain in my story, just a mirror for all the people who float through life assuming someone else will pay the price. Celeste moved in with her parents. Again. At first, she tried to maintain some communication, updates about her job, polite asks about Zadie, carefully crafted messages designed to test the waters. I didn't block her. I answered when it felt appropriate. But I stopped letting her speak like we were still partners. I stopped softening the truth. "This isn't temporary," I told her once, when she asked if I'd ever reconsider. "You didn't just cross a line, Celeste. You helped build the machinery that tried to grind us down." She said nothing after that, and I was fine with the silence. Meanwhile, our home, Zadie's home, began to transform. I turned the second bedroom into a creative space. Art supplies. A child-sized drafting table beside mine. We worked together sometimes. Me sketching facades and support beams, her drawing stick figures and dragons with way too many eyes. She'd bring me scraps of construction paper and say, "This is a house for the giraffe. He needs space too." And I'd tape them up like architectural renderings. Peace became a rhythm. It wasn't quiet all the time. She had tantrums, of course, spilled milk, crayons on the walls, but it was safe. Predictable. Ours. I began sleeping through the night again. Not worrying about someone asking for more than I could give. Not wondering which crisis would land in my lap at Sunday dinner. And oddly, my work got better. I started attracting new clients, ones who appreciated the way I balanced structure with story. I even got an offer to collaborate on a sustainable housing project for single parents. "We want someone who gets it," they said. And I did. Every brick, every choice, now it all felt personal. Zadie asked about her mom sometimes. Not often. But when she did, I answered with truth, not bitterness. "She's figuring some things out," I'd say. "And when she's ready, you'll see her again. But right now, Daddy's here. Always." That was the promise I kept. Not just in words, but in action. One night, while I was tucking her in, she looked up at me and asked, "Do you think I'll remember all this when I'm big?" I paused, surprised. "What do you mean?" "This house. Us. Just being happy." I sat beside her and pulled the blanket up to her chin. "I hope you remember how it felt," I said. "Because that's what matters. Not all the noise, not the people who made things hard. Just this. Right here." She smiled, eyes already heavy with sleep. "Okay. I'll remember." And I believed her. Because peace, once hard-won, leaves an imprint deeper than any scar. There's a myth people love to believe, that peace is quiet. That it lives in stillness, in soft mornings and muted colors, in polite dinners and tranquil smiles. But the kind of peace I found wasn't about quiet. It wasn't even about comfort. It was about protection, about knowing what, and who, you would never let cross your threshold again. Real peace has edges. It doesn't beg to be kept. It defends its place. Zadie was 5 now, wiser than her years, though I tried my best to let her just be a kid. She still liked grilled cheese and apple slices cut into stars. Still made up songs in the back seat. Still asked the kind of blunt, fearless questions that only children and philosophers get away with. And every time I looked at her, I saw the choice I'd made in its purest form. I hadn't walked away from a marriage. I'd stepped into fatherhood with both feet planted and my back straight. Our house, the condo Verena once tried to turn into a transactional asset, had evolved into something unshakable. It wasn't just walls and windows anymore. It was sanctuary. It smelled like lavender and buttered toast most days. Zadie's artwork lined the hallway in mismatched frames, each one slightly crooked but proud. My study, once sterile and quiet, now bore stickers on the side of my desk and a "No boys allowed, except Daddy" sign taped to the door. And despite the scars, despite the trials and the courtroom shadows and the echoes of what Celeste and I used to be, I found myself breathing easier, laughing without checking who was listening, sitting down at the end of the day and not waiting for something to collapse. I'd come to realize something no one really teaches you. Peace is not the absence of problems. It's the presence of boundaries. It's choosing who gets access, who gets explanations, and who gets silence. Celeste saw Zadie once a month now, supervised and brief. She tried, I'll give her that. Brought little gifts. Asked questions. Tried to fold herself into conversations without looking desperate. But Zadie was watchful. She didn't cling. Didn't rush into Celeste's arms. She kept a measured distance like a child who remembered more than she let on. She never asked to stay longer. Never cried when her mother left. And maybe that was a different kind of grief, but it wasn't mine to carry. I'd built consistency. What Celeste had built was a pattern of absence and reappearance. One Sunday, after a short visit, Zadie asked, "Did Mommy always talk to Grandma more than you?" I didn't dodge it. I never did with her. "Yeah," I said. "Most of the time." "Did that make you sad?" "A little," I admitted. She thought about that. She always did. Chewed on things emotionally before speaking. "I think Mommy talks more to Grandma because she doesn't know how to be quiet with other people." That stopped me. Not because it was untrue, but because she'd said it so plainly. So without cruelty, I kissed the top of her head. "You're smart." "I know," she whispered, already skipping to the next thought. "Can we get pancakes tomorrow?" We made them from scratch the next morning. Flour on the counter, blueberries in the batter, her face dusted with sugar. That was our rhythm. Simple things, consistently done. And in that simplicity, I found the version of myself I'd nearly lost trying to fit into someone else's blueprint. My work, too, had taken on new shape. The home studio had become my nerve center. Clients came and went, restoration projects, residential expansions, green space designs, but now they were the kind of clients I wanted. Not the ones with deep pockets and shallow respect. I was building for people who wanted homes, not statements. And every structure I designed had a bit of Zadie in it, little hidden moments of joy, soft corners, space for light to spill in without interruption. There was a moment, a few months into the new custody rhythm, when Celeste asked to speak to me alone. She showed up early for a visit, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here to fight," she said before I could say a word. "I'm not even here to ask for more time." I let her in, but I didn't offer coffee. I didn't invite her to sit. She stood in the kitchen doorway and glanced around like she was seeing the place for the first time. "You kept it beautiful," she said. "The house. Everything." "I kept it ours," I replied. "For Zadie." She nodded slowly. Then her eyes softened, and her voice followed. "I wasn't strong enough to fight them. I know that now." "I know you do," I said. I thought I was protecting Sloane. "No," I said quietly. "You were protecting the version of yourself they approved of." She winced. "Not from my words, but from their truth." "I didn't think you'd really leave," she said. "I didn't leave," I replied. "I stayed right here. You just stopped standing next to me." She let that land. Didn't argue. Didn't deflect. After a moment, she said, "She's happy." "She is." "You did that." "We both could have," I said. "But only one of us made it a priority." And then, for the first time, she did something I hadn't expected. She apologized. "I'm sorry," she said. No explanations. No follow-ups. Just 3 quiet, honest words. I didn't offer forgiveness, because that wasn't what she came for. She didn't earn back trust with a single sentence, and she knew that. But there was something in the way she said it, something raw, without armor, that made me believe maybe she was learning. Not fast. Not perfectly. But learning. After she left, Zadie came out of her room holding one of her drawings. "That for Mommy?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. For you. It's our house." It was a shaky sketch. 2 windows, a smiling sun, a figure with a mustache and square arms beside a tiny one with pigtails. But there was something else. A tall shape standing off to the side. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing. She thought for a moment. "That's the fence." "The fence." She nodded. "So people can't take our house again." I didn't correct her. I didn't explain property law or trust structures or court orders. I just held the picture and whispered, "That's a smart fence." She beamed. I drew it extra strong. Later that night, I pinned it above my desk. It hangs there still, not as a reminder of what we survived, but of what we chose to build. Because real peace doesn't arrive with silence. It arrives with intention, with boundaries shaped like fences and names placed on deeds, with grilled cheese on Thursday nights and little girl drawings that understand more about safety than some adults ever will. I didn't escape a marriage, I redefined home. And now, every morning when sunlight hits the same corner of the hardwood, I know what I'm looking at. Not a victory. A life. Protected. Preserved. Ours. The thing about hindsight is that it doesn't whisper, it roars. Looking back now, it's painfully clear that what Celeste called loyalty was never about partnership. It was about allegiance. And in the Maris household, allegiance didn't mean trust or support. It meant obedience. It meant going along, even when going along meant going down with them. I didn't see it at first. Not clearly. Love has a way of softening the edges of warning signs, dressing red flags in tradition and excuses. I wanted to believe I was joining a family that would lift us up. But what I joined was a machine. And Verena Maris sat at its control panel. When I married Celeste, I thought I was choosing someone who saw me, my effort, my vision, my heart. But what I really became was the designated provider, the fallback, the fixer. And when the machine needed more fuel, when Sloane crashed and burned for the 3rd or 4th time, they didn't ask. They expected. Because to them, being family didn't mean mutual respect. It meant blind compliance. And for a while, I gave it. I gave more than I had. I gave time, money, patience. I gave up pieces of my home, of my sanity, of my voice. All for the illusion of harmony. But the truth was, there was no harmony. Just performance. A carefully staged play in which my role was always to nod, to agree, to make things easier for everyone else. And when I stopped performing, when I protected the one thing that truly mattered, my daughter, suddenly I wasn't family anymore. Suddenly I was selfish, disloyal, cold. They didn't call it control, of course. They called it tradition. They dressed it up in concern. They used words like unity and sacrifice and doing what's best. But control doesn't always come in shouts. Sometimes it arrives in smiles, in dinner invitations laced with manipulation, in the phrase, "We just thought you'd understand." And love without protection? That's not love. That's theater. I used to wonder if I failed as a husband. But now I see it differently. I didn't fail. I refused to be erased. I refused to let my daughter become collateral in a never-ending series of bad decisions dressed up as family obligations. I didn't walk away from Celeste because I stopped loving her. I walked away because she stopped standing beside me. Because every time the pressure came from her mother or her brother, she folded in that direction. And every time I tried to talk about boundaries, she called it distance. So I gave her what she named. Distance. Space to measure her loyalties. Space to live inside the world Verena built, where appearance mattered more than substance and favors were bartered like currency. And I stayed here with Zadie, not because I won, but because I chose a different kind of life. People think walking away is the hard part. It's not. The hard part is staying true to your line in the sand when the waves come crashing. The hard part is hearing people talk behind your back. People who only saw the Instagram posts, the smiles at parties, the curated holiday cards. The ones who say, "He just snapped," or "I thought they were perfect." But perfect doesn't protect you when the lights go out. And love isn't real if it can't stand up to pressure. Now, I wake up to a house that reflects who I am, not who I was asked to be. There's no committee rearranging the furniture. No constant second-guessing of my instincts. Zadie knows this place is hers. Not because it was given to her, but because it was protected for her. And that makes all the difference. Sometimes I still hear Celeste's voice in my head. The way she used to say, "We're stronger together." I think she meant it. But what she never realized was that together only works when both people are holding the weight. If one person's always lifting and the other's always steering the ship into icebergs, it doesn't matter how tightly you hold hands, you still sink. Celeste never wanted a partner. She wanted a soldier. Someone to carry out the mission without question. And when I stopped following orders, she didn't know what to do with me. But Zadie does. She knows how to crawl into my lap with a book and say, "I like it when it's just us." She knows how to ask questions without fear. How to build Legos and name the tower after her favorite fruit. How to laugh with her whole body. That's what I saved. Not just her comfort, but her freedom to be exactly who she is. One night, after a particularly long bedtime story, she looked up at me and said, "I like how you listen." It undid me, because that's what I had wanted all along. Not control, not power, just to be heard. And in this small, sacred life we've carved out, that's what I finally have. Verena can keep her empire. Sloan can keep his excuses. Celeste can keep her silence. I have my daughter. I have my voice. And I have peace. Not the kind you sit in, but the kind you guard. The kind you earn.